Welcome back to Apex Truth. Tonight, we journey to the most dangerous forest on Earth. The Sundarbans. A vast, shifting labyrinth of mangroves, mud, and salt water that straddles the border of India and Bangladesh. Here, the rules of the jungle are reversed. In most forests, you watch the ground for snakes. In the Sundarbans, you watch the water. You watch the trees. You watch the mud. But our story takes us to the edge of this nightmare, to Bhola Island. The largest island in the delta, a place usually considered safe from the deep jungle terrors. But in the winter of 1974, that safety was shattered. They called it the Bhola Man-Eater. Unlike the tigers of Kuman that hunted in the hills, the tigers of the delta are amphibious. They swim like otters. They drink salt water. And they have a terrifying reputation. They are the only tigers in the world that are genetically predisposed to view humans as prey. The terror began with a group of Mawal's honey collectors. These men are the bravest souls in the delta. They venture into the dense mangroves to collect the prized wild honey. They wear masks on the backs of their heads because a tiger prefers to attack from behind. They believe the mask tricks the beast into thinking it is being watched. But the Bhola tiger was not a beast that could be tricked. It was a beast that learned. It was late afternoon. The tide was coming in the magic hour of the delta, when the water rises rapidly, drowning the mudflats and cutting off escape routes. Rahim, a veteran honey collector, was leading a small boat of 3 men into a narrow creek near the southern tip of Bhola Island. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of rotting vegetation. Rahim felt a strange heaviness in his chest. The forest was too quiet. No monkeys chattered. No kingfishers dived. It was the silence of a graveyard. "We should turn back," whispered Karim, the youngest of the group. "The water is rising too fast." Rahim scoffed. "We need one more comb. Just one." He steered the small wooden boat toward a massive gua tree, its roots twisting out of the black water like skeletal fingers. High up, a massive beehive hung. Rahim stood up to reach for the smoking torch. That's when the boat rocked. Not from a wave. Something large, something massive, had just passed underneath them. Rahim froze. He looked down into the murky, brown water. Bubbles were rising to the surface. "Stay still," he hissed. "Do not move." But it was too late. The water erupted. It didn't attack the boat. It didn't attack the men in the boat. A massive, orange and black shape launched itself from the water onto the muddy bank behind them. It shook the water from its coat, not with a roar, but with a low, vibrating growl that rattled the wood of their boat. It was the Bhola tiger. And it wasn't looking at them with hunger. It was looking at them with recognition. It had cut off their exit to the open river. It had trapped them in the creek. The hunt had begun, and the tide was on the tiger's side. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. The Bhola tiger stood on the muddy bank, its wet fur glistening like oil in the fading light. It didn't roar. It didn't crouch. It simply stared at the men in the boat with cold, amber eyes that seemed to possess a terrifying intelligence. Rahim, the veteran, gripped his paddle so hard his knuckles turned white. "Don't look it in the eye," he whispered, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Back the boat up. Slowly." But the Sundarbans is a treacherous ally. The tide was surging in now, pushing the water level higher, bringing the boat level with the muddy banks. The creek was narrowing. Suddenly, without a sound, the tiger slipped off the bank. It didn't jump. It didn't splash. It slid into the brown water like a seal. One moment it was there, a solid mass of muscle and death. The next, it was gone. "Where is it?" Karim screamed, standing up and rocking the small wooden craft dangerously. "I can't see it." "Sit down." Rahim barked. The water around them was opaque, a swirling soup of silt and mud. The tiger was now invisible. It could be anywhere. Under the boat. Behind the mangrove roots. Watching. Waiting. The men frantically paddled, trying to fight the incoming current to get back to the main river. But the water seemed to be fighting them. Thump. Something brushed against the bottom of the boat. The wood groaned. The men froze. The creature was testing the hull. It was measuring them. "It's under us," the third man, Jamal, whimpered. He was holding the smoking honey torch, his hands shaking so badly that sparks were falling into the water. Then, the jungle went silent again. The water smoothed out. Minutes passed. They thought perhaps it had lost interest. Perhaps it had gone for easier prey. They were wrong. Rahim spotted it first. 50 yards ahead, near a bend in the creek, a small ripple broke the surface. Just a nose and two eyes, cruising low in the water like a crocodile. It had swum ahead of them. It wasn't chasing them, it was intercepting them. It climbed onto a low-hanging branch of a massive sundari tree that arched over the water, the very path they had to pass to escape. It lay flat on the branch, dripping wet, blending perfectly with the dark bark and shadows. "It's blocking the way," Rahim realized with horror. "It knows we have to pass under that tree." They had two choices: stay here and wait for nightfall, suicide, or try to paddle past the tree at full speed and hope the beast missed. Rahim looked at his men. "Paddle," he commanded, his voice trembling. "Paddle for your lives." The boat surged forward. The water churned. As they approached the overhanging branch, the tiger didn't move. It was a statue of death. Just as the boat passed underneath, the tiger didn't pounce on the men. It did something far more calculated. It dropped. Not onto a person, but onto the side of the boat. The massive weight of 400 pounds of muscle hitting the gunwale capsized the small craft instantly. The torch hissed and died in the water. Darkness swallowed them. The men were thrown into the cold, salty water of the delta. They were in the tiger's element now. The silence of the jungle was replaced by the chaotic splashing of three men fighting for their lives. The water of the Sundarbans is not like a swimming pool, it is a thick, churning soup of silt, salt, and hidden currents. It blinds you instantly. Rahim kicked wildly, his lungs burning, until his head broke the surface. He gasped, spitting out the brackish water. "Kareem! Jamal!" he screamed, wiping the mud from his eyes. The overturned boat was bobbing a few feet away, looking like the carcass of a dead whale. Kareem was clinging to it, coughing and shivering. But where was Jamal? "Help! Help me!" The scream came from behind Rahim. He spun around in the water, treading heavily against the current. 10 yards away, Jamal was thrashing. He wasn't swimming. He was being pulled. The Bhola Tiger had not just knocked them over, it had targeted the man who fell closest to its jaws. Rahim saw it then, a flash of orange beneath the brown surface. The tiger wasn't biting Jamal's arm or leg. It had clamped its massive jaws around Jamal's shoulder, pulling him down. "Jamal!" Rahim lunged forward, though he knew it was hopeless. You cannot fight a tiger on land; in the water, it is a suicide mission. Jamal's eyes met Rahim's for one split second. They were wide with a terror that no human should ever experience. He opened his mouth to scream again, but the tiger performed a maneuver usually seen in crocodiles, not cats. It rolled. The massive beast twisted its body underwater, generating a vortex of power. Splosh! Jamal was yanked under the surface violently. There was no struggle. No prolonged fight. Just a sudden, violent disappearance. A few seconds later, a stream of bubbles rose to the surface. Then, a dark stain of red began to spread in the moonlight, turning the brown water into black ink. "Rahim! The bank! Go to the bank!" Kareem yelled from the boat. Rahim was frozen, staring at the spot where his friend had vanished. The water was calm now. The predator had secured its prize. But the realization hit him like a physical blow: tigers are possessive. It would take Jamal to the shore to eat. And if Rahim was still in the water, he was just dessert. He turned and swam frantically toward the mangrove roots. The mud of the bank was not solid ground, it was knee-deep, sucking clay. As Rahim clawed his way up, the mud grabbed his legs like quicksand. He scrambled on all fours, slipping, sliding, covered in slime, until he collapsed next to Kareem among the sharp-breathing roots of the mangrove trees. They were out of the water. But they were now stranded on a tiny, muddy islet in the middle of the delta, with no boat, no fire, and no weapons. And across the narrow creek, on the opposite bank, they heard a sound that froze their blood. Crunch. The sound of bones breaking. The tiger had surfaced. It was eating. And it was watching them across the narrow channel, ensuring its next meal didn't go too far. Night fell over the Sundarbans like a heavy shroud. The darkness in the delta is absolute. Without the torch, Rahim and Kareem were blind. But the darkness wasn't their only enemy. The moon was full, and with it came the Borokodal, the great tide. The water in the creek began to rise rapidly. The muddy bank where they huddled was disappearing inch by inch. The cold, salty water lapped at their ankles, then their knees. The Sundarbans was reclaiming the land, and if they stayed on the mud, they would drown or be washed right into the jaws of the waiting beast. "We have to climb," Rahim whispered, his voice shaking. They looked around. The mangroves here were slick with algae and studded with breathing roots that stuck out of the mud like spikes. They chose a sturdy gua tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, rising out of the rising water. It was a nightmare ascent. The bark was slippery, covered in slime. Their hands, coated in mud, struggled to find purchase. Kareem boosted Rahim up to the first fork, about 10 feet above the water. Then Rahim reached down, grabbing Kareem's wrist, hauling him up just as the water swallowed the mud bank completely. They sat perched on the narrow branches, shivering, wet, and terrified. Below them, the forest floor had become a sea. The creek was now indistinguishable from the river. Then, they saw it. About 40 yards away, where they had heard the sickening sounds of the tiger eating, a small wake broke the surface of the moonlit water. V-shaped ripples. Two pale, glowing orbs appeared, the eyes of the predator, reflecting the moonlight. It was coming back. The Bhola Tiger hadn't had its fill. Or perhaps, like a true man-eater, it wasn't just hungry, it was exterminating the intruders. It swam silently, its head cutting through the black water, heading straight for their tree. "It knows," Kareem sobbed, hugging the tree trunk. "It knows we are here." The tiger reached the base of their tree. It didn't roar. It circled the trunk, paddling effortlessly. Then, with a sudden burst of power, it lunged out of the water. Scratch! Its massive claws raked the bark just a few feet below Kareem's dangling legs. The tree shook violently, nearly knocking them into the water. The tiger fell back with a splash, only to surface immediately, looking up at them. It wasn't just trying to climb, it was testing the tree's strength. It began to gnaw at the exposed roots, snapping them with audible cracks. The beast was calculating, persistent, and terrifyingly patient. It knew they couldn't stay up there forever. It simply had to wait for them to fall, or for the tide to rise high enough to bring them within reach. The night dragged on, a slow torture of fear and exhaustion. The water continued to rise until it was lapping just a few feet below the lowest branch. The tiger remained below, a circling shadow in the black water. Every time Rahim or Kareem shifted their weight, the tree groaned, and the tiger would stop paddling, looking up with those burning amber eyes, anticipating the fall. Around 2 a.m., the cold began to take its toll. Hypothermia is a silent killer in the delta. Kareem's teeth were chattering so violently he could barely speak. His grip on the slimy branch was weakening. "Raheem, bye," Kareem whispered, his voice slurring. "I can't feel my hands." Raheem reached out and grabbed Kareem's shoulder. "Don't you dare let go. Think of your family. Stay awake." But the tiger seemed to sense the weakness. It changed tactics. It stopped circling and swam to a neighboring tree, a large sundari with branches that interlocked with theirs. The tiger hauled itself out of the water, its wet claws digging into the bark. It was climbing. Tigers are not natural climbers like leopards, but in the Sundarbans, they adapt. They are heavy and clumsy in the trees, but they are determined. The branch dipped dangerously under the 400-pound weight. The tiger moved slowly, balancing like a tightrope walker, its eyes fixed on Kareem. It was now on the same level as them, just 10 feet away across a gap of dark water and tangled branches. It let out a low, guttural hiss. Raheem looked around desperately for a weapon. He had nothing. No knife. No paddle. Only his turban. "Take off your gamsha, towel," Raheem ordered Kareem. "What?" "Give it to me. Now." Raheem took his own long cotton scarf and tied it to Kareem's. He dipped the end into the hollow of the tree where rainwater had collected a thick, stagnant sludge. "When it jumps," Raheem said, "whip it in the eyes. It's our only chance." The tiger crouched. Its muscles bunched under the wet fur. It was preparing to leap across the gap. It launched itself. A massive, flying shadow against the moon. "Now!" Raheem screamed. He lashed out with the wet, heavy cloth, aiming for the beast's face. Smack! The sodden fabric struck the tiger squarely across the eyes mid-air. It wasn't a deadly blow, but it was unexpected. The tiger flinched, twisting its head. Its front paws missed the main branch by inches. It scrabbled desperately at the bark, its claws shredding the wood, trying to haul itself up. Raheem kicked out with his bare foot, stomping on the tiger's paw. With a roar of frustration, the beast lost its grip. It fell backward, crashing into the water below with a tremendous splash. The current, now at its peak, swept it away from the tree for a moment. They had survived the assault. But for how long? The longest night of their lives finally began to fade. The eastern sky turned a bruised purple, then a pale gray. And with the dawn, the water began to retreat. The battle, ebb tide, in the Sundarbans is just as dangerous as the flood. As the water drained away, it revealed the forest floor a vast, glistening expanse of gray, sucking mud. The roots of the mangroves stood exposed like the ribs of a skeleton. Raheem and Kareem were still clinging to the tree, their bodies stiff and numb. They hadn't seen the tiger since it fell, but the silence of the forest told them it was still there. A tiger does not abandon a hunt easily, especially not one that has tasted blood. Around 6 a.m., a sound cut through the mist. Thud 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 thud. The distinctive, rhythmic chugging of a diesel engine. A body, a local mechanized boat. Raheem, bye. A boat. Kareem croaked, his lips cracked and blue. "We are saved." They waved their shirts frantically. "Hey! Over here! Help!" The boat turned. It was a Forest Department patrol vessel, alerted by the villagers who had seen their empty boat drifting downriver. The patrol boat was large, with high sides, but the creek was too shallow now due to the low tide. It couldn't come to the tree. It stopped about 40 yards away, stuck in the deeper channel. A guard stood on the deck, holding a rifle. "Come," he shouted. "Walk to us. We can't come closer." Raheem looked down. The ground was now a sea of deep, wet clay. To reach the boat, they would have to descend the tree and wade through 40 yards of open mud. "Where is the tiger?" Kareem whispered, looking at the dense wall of roots surrounding them. "I don't know," Raheem said, pulling his knife, which he had recovered from his belt earlier. "But we cannot stay here. If the tide comes back, we die. Move." They slid down the tree. Their feet hit the mud with a wet squelch. Immediately, they sank to their knees. The mud of the Sundarbans is like glue, it sucks you in. Every step requires a massive effort. "Keep moving," Rahim urged. "Don't stop." They were halfway to the boat, 20 yards from the tree, 20 yards from safety, when the guard on the boat suddenly screamed, "Run! Behind you!" Rahim spun around, fighting the suction of the mud. The tiger hadn't been hiding in the forest. It had been lying flat in a depression in the mud, right behind the very tree they had been hiding in. It was coated in gray slime, perfectly camouflaged. As soon as they were in the open, it rose. It didn't growl. It launched itself. A tiger can cover 20 yards in 2 seconds on firm ground. In the mud, it was slower, but still faster than the men. It bounded forward, its massive paws splaying out to stop it from sinking, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Fire! Shoot it!" Rahim screamed at the boat. The guard raised his old .303 rifle. Bang! The shot went wild, hitting the water. The boat was rocking in the current, ruining the aim. The tiger was now 10 yards away. Its eyes were locked on Karim, the slower of the two. Rahim made a split-second decision. He didn't run toward the boat. He stopped, turned, and stood between the beast and the boy. He raised his small, rusty knife, a toothpick against a monster. "Go," he roared at Karim. "Get to the boat." The tiger saw the obstruction. It didn't slow down. It opened its jaws, revealing yellow teeth stained with the blood of their friend Jamal. It prepared to launch the final spring that would crush Rahim into the mud. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder and salt. Rahim braced himself for the teeth, closing his eyes, his small knife raised in a futile gesture of defiance. He felt the hot, rancid breath of the tiger on his face. Crack thump. The sound wasn't the roar of the tiger. It was the heavy, dull thud of a .303 bullet striking muscle and bone. At the very last second, the forest guard on the boat, a marksman named Heron, had found his mark. The bullet slammed into the tiger's left shoulder mid-leap. The impact was devastating. It didn't kill the massive cat, but it shattered the momentum of its charge. The tiger twisted in the air, snarling in pain, and crashed into the deep mud just 2 feet away from Rahim. The mud, which had been the men's enemy, now became their savior. The wounded tiger thrashed, trying to find footing to strike again, but its heavy body sank into the soft clay. "Pull them! Now!" Heron screamed from the deck, working the bolt of his rifle for another shot. 2 crewmen threw a rope. Rahim grabbed it with one hand, hooking his other arm around Karim's waist. The engine of the boat roared to life, churning the brown water. The crew hauled the rope with frantic strength, dragging the 2 men through the sludge toward the hull. Rahim scrambled up the side of the boat, his fingernails tearing against the wood, and hauled Karim up after him. They collapsed onto the deck, covered in gray slime, gasping for air, their hearts pounding so hard it hurt. "Is it dead?" Karim whispered, trembling violently. Rahim crawled to the railing and looked back. The tiger was not dead. It had managed to pull itself out of the sucking mud. It stood at the edge of the mangrove line, favoring its left leg. It wasn't roaring. It wasn't charging. It was watching. Its amber eyes, burning with an intelligence that felt almost human, locked onto Rahim's one last time. There was no fear in those eyes, only a cold promise. Then, with a slow, limping gait, the Bhola Man-Eater turned and melted back into the dense green wall of the Sundarbans. The aftermath. Rahim and Karim survived, but they were never the same. They never returned to the forest to collect honey. The trauma of that night, the sight of Jamal being dragged into the depths, the waiting in the tree, the final charge haunted them forever. The Bhola Tiger was never officially recorded as killed. Some say it died of its wounds in the deep swamps. Others, the old fishermen of the delta, believe it survived. They say it learned that humans with guns are dangerous, and it became a silent ghost, taking victims only when the fog was thick and the boats were far from home. To this day, Bhola Island remains one of the wildest places on Earth. If you go there, you will see villagers wearing masks on the backs of their heads. You will see shrines dedicated to Bonbabai, the goddess of the forest. And you will hear the warning, in other jungles, the tiger is just an animal. In the Sundarbans, the tiger is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. So, the next time you look at a map of the calm, winding rivers of the delta, remember the 3 men who went for honey and found hell. Remember that in the kingdom of the tides, you are not the hunter. You are the bait. If this story of the Bhola Man-Eater kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this with your friends who think they could survive the wild. And don't forget to subscribe to Apex Truth for more true stories of nature's deadliest predators. I'm your host. Respect the water. Watch the trees. And never, ever turn your back on the jungle.